Okay, so why don't you explain the question and then re-ask the new question?
Yeah, I have a listing. The seller is the sole heir to his mother's property. He has been signing his documents with his name and executor. Uh, and then we were hit with that he needs to fill out and sign a representative capacity signature disclosure, which we had not done so far. So he went back and checked with the escrow, and I did as well. And then when I sent it to you, you mentioned that he would sign, he would do the executor section of an estate on the rep capacity form. But when I go back and look at that, that seems to be tied to court appointee, etc. And this is not the case. When I talked to Jordan at Fidelity, she said that he is designated as the heir/executor. He's the sole heir. And since he's the sole heir, they also do a form called a certificate of transfer without probate.
Right.
Right. So my question is, it's okay for us to still do that section on the rep capacity as a state, and there's just no
Yeah.
court number?
Well, the court, the law allows for him to proceed without a probate. So
Mm-hmm.
that's essentially the court authorizing that.
Okay. All right. So we
So
just do
that
that
language,
section.
yeah, that language is consistent.
Okay, that's great. Then we'll go ahead and just do that, and then hopefully everybody will be happy.
Yeah, okay.
Thank you.
How did you sign, how did you have him sign the RPA?
It
As,
was as executor. That
yeah,
was
yeah.
it.
Okay, good.
So
Good.
we don't need to do an addendum to alter that or anything.
Well, if you signed in 33B down there in that section as executor, is that
He did. We didn't. He just signed in the seller section, so I guess we
okay,
do
yeah.
need to. That's okay, or should we have him do the checkbox signing as?
Yeah, do the checkbox.
Okay, we'll
But I
go.
mean, if you're going to do the RCESD anyway,
Yeah.
then don't bother with the changing the RPA.
Okay, great.
You'll have it. You'll just have the second document.
Okay, wonderful. All right, thank
Okay.
you.
All right. Well, good morning, everybody. And we were addressing a question that Yvonne had emailed me about earlier. Just to recap, she has a seller who's the heir, executor, sole heir of a property from his mother. They listed the property and it's sold now. In the RPA, he just signed on the regular seller signature line as executor. So we didn't complete the seller is actually the estate of blank, blank, blank mom, and he's the executor. I think that's how it'll work out. That's how you fill out the RCSD. So the buyer's TC was asking for the RC, the representative capacity form, which usually we don't need because we sign it on the RPA. But in this case, we didn't sign it on the RPA, so we'll complete the RCSD, and that'll be the substitute, and we won't have to change the RPA. Okay.
Great,
Anybody got any questions on that? Thanks, Ivan.
thank you.
I just sent you all an email. Again, sorry to inundate you with emails. I try to keep it to a minimum. But I just got notice of the webinar that Broker Risk Management will be doing on January 22nd at 9:30 a.m. To cover new laws affecting real estate, effective in 2024. Yay for 2024, huh? And the changes to the CAR forms that and the new forms that were created with the I think it was December 20th or so forms release, and there were like 58 changed forms or something like that. So they'll be covering that on January 22nd. This is part of the fees we pay to the brokerage, so we can employ broker risk management as a management counsel and a risk management counsel. So please take advantage of it. Sign up. There's a link where you have to register for the Zoom meeting. It's best to watch live. If you can't watch it live, they do record it, and we'll get you out a link to the recording. But that's coming up in January. Okay, I'm going to cover some marketing things first off. And the agent, one of our agents has listed a property, and she's going to recognize what I'm talking about. So don't kind of, we can talk offline if you have any further questions about this. I don't want to call her out here on the call. Anyway, when we're using language to identify a property, there's certain language that we really have to be careful about using. In fact, I think we had a list of these words at one point. I'll look and see if I can find it and send it along with the recording today. One of those words is new. Okay. When we use the word new, we might say new roof. We might say new plumbing. We might say new wiring. And new is kind of like who knew as to when. You know, it might have been new 4 months ago, 3 months ago, 2 months ago, but is it new now? So what we like to do is, like we do in the AVID, is not to use an adjective like new, but just to state what we've got. So what we have is substantial work done to electrical in September 22, September 2022, or over during 2022. You know, substantial work done to plumbing during the year 2022. You know, things like that, rather than describe it as new, because someone's going to say, well, this isn't new. This is at some point that new is going to tie into something old, right? You know, like at some point it's going to plug into something old. So what's the new part? And the same with the roof. You know, the seller may have put a new roof on in September 2022, but is that roof considered new now in January 2024? So it's best to be specific about those, point them out. You know, roof replaced in 2022, and then you know, the buyer can investigate from there.
Gary, how do you feel about the word newer?
Again, it's an adjective that someone's going to say, well, what does that mean? You know, I would rather you say, like you do in your AVID, or we hope you do in your AVID, that you observed this, you know, that appliances replaced in December 2023. Are they new appliances? I don't know. You know, you don't know. How do you know? So just be factual rather than use the adjective. I don't know, in marketing, we like to use as many adjectives as possible to get things attractive to people. But just be careful with those particular words. And I will try to find that list. I know there was a list of words to avoid using if possible. All right, so another explanation would be the seller tells us, well, the roof has 5 or 10 years left on it. Okay, so do we want to say that the roof has 5 or 10 years left on it? Not really, because that's just the seller's opinion. Even one roofer may come out with an opinion and tell you it has 5 or 10 years left on it, and the other roofer will say it needs replacing today. So I've seen that happen. I would avoid that kind of statement altogether. and just let the buyer do their due diligence and investigate the roof if they feel they want to investigate the roof. Other descriptions, the seller may give us a description about, wells or septic on the property. The seller may say, well, the septic's working fine. Do we want to say the septic is working fine? Not really, or we aren't septic experts. I mean, if you want to attribute it to the seller, you can say the seller says what septic is working fine. Well, that's okay. Then it's the seller's call. Same with wells, the well needs this or that to make it more functional. We aren't well experts, so we shouldn't be making representations about that. And it's not really helpful in the marketing. You would say septic system, 2 wells, and just describe the property. Even to go as far as describing landscaping, mature landscaping. Well, whose opinion is it mature? You might say there's fruit trees on the property, which is good, but how do you describe those fruit trees? Maybe they're diseased. They might be mature, but they're diseased. So just kind of saying fruit trees or beautiful landscaping. I don't mind the word beautiful. That's kind of I don't think you can get in trouble for saying beautiful. And then, of course, quoting acreage and square footage. When the property's in the MLS, it's going to ask you where you're attributing that information to, from the tax records, from the owner's statement, from a survey, from an appraiser. And on that form we use about square footage and lot disclosure, we attribute to where we got that information. But I always like to use, if I'm going to put in a square footage on a marketing piece, I always want to use plus or minus. So you might say 2,000 square feet plus or minus, 1.4 acres plus or minus. So we just protect ourselves from being, someone calling us, gosh, one of the major lawsuits was around just a half an acre difference in a 4-acre parcel or something, and it was described as 4 acres and it was really 3.72, and there was a lawsuit around. So 4 plus or minus kind of protects us a little bit in that area. Okay, that covers my rant on marketing. Any any questions? Okay. So some form stuff. We had a transaction where in the course of the negotiations, we were representing the seller. We had a listing agreement where the seller was going to pay the buyer's agent 2.5% fee. During the course of the negotiations, and I don't know why this happened, but it's okay, it's part of the negotiations, the seller agreed to pay the buyer's agent 2.75%. So how do we document this? So, we don't want to write an amendment to the contract because the contract is between the buyer and seller and doesn't include the agents, so it doesn't include the commissions. But we can do is this form here, which is the modification of listing, buyer representation, or other agreement between principal and broker. So this is between the seller and us as listing agent. In this case, it could be between a buyer and you as in a buyer broker agreement. So, we would check listing agreement here, which would fill out the preamble as usual. The list price hasn't changed, the expiration hasn't changed, but this other part has changed. So now we're going to say seller to pay buyer's agent 2.75%. Now, is the seller going to pay that in all transactions? No, he originally agreed to pay 2.5, but in this particular transaction, he's agreed to 2.75% for this particular transaction. So you want to in the transaction where John Doe is the buyer, dated, and then you would have the date of the contract and so forth and so on. So you describe to what transaction this 2.75% applies, and it would not change the listing agreement if this deal fell through for a different transaction. Does that make sense?
Garrett, I have a question. So I'm presuming that with this, it was that the seller was actually gonna offer up more money. It wasn't a redistribution of the existing commission.
I don't even know that. No, I think our share of the commission was going to be the same, so it was just an
Okay.
increase.
So it was an increase.
0.25%. If it was a redistribution, then we should probably state in there that seller's agent to receive, 0.25% less than what was in the agreement.
Okay.
If that's what it was. That was never kind of identified to me, but it's a good question. I just assumed it was just an additional amount they were willing to pay. Okay. We got we're representing a seller. We got a form from another brokerage, and it was called a sales broker disclosure, sales broker lending disclosure, something like that. Well, what it was is that that particular broker, real estate broker, was also a lender. And so they had a disclosure stating that they were also the lender to the buyer in the transaction. They wanted us to sign that and acknowledge it. We get lots of forms, well, not lots, but we get some forms from other brokerages that we don't necessarily use. They're asking our clients to sign them. They're asking us to sign some of them. And some of them we just ignore and say we aren't going to sign that because we don't like it. And some are innocuous or okay. I ran this by Shannon, our broker risk management counsel, and she said, that's fine. You can sign it, just make sure you disclose it to your client or seller. We don't have to have them sign it. This doesn't have a place for them to sign it, but we still want to disclose it to them so they know that the buyer's broker is also the buyer's lender for whatever reason they would want to know that. Okay. So if you get a strange form you don't like, or you don't think you like, or you don't think your client doesn't like, send it over. We'll get it looked at, and we can either reject it or agree to sign it. Okay. We had a question last week. We have a 6-unit property, and the buyer's agent used the RIPA form, the Residential Income Purchase Agreement form. And our agent really hadn't seen this form before. Is that form showing up on the screen? Someone unmute and tell me.
Yes.
Thank you. Yeah, so the RIPA, my take on this is the RPA is good for a single family 1 to 4 units. It'll cover that sufficiently. You get over 4 units and you want to, we're going to want to have this RIPA involved. And it's a very similar form. It's got the grid. It just has some additional information to cover the additional tenants. Things like estoppel certificates and other things that are related to a larger income property. So we would want to use that form. Any questions on that? Another form came up this week was the SELM. So we have a listing where the seller wants to exclude the property either temporarily or permanently from the MLS. Now, the MLS has a form for this too, but the CAR has a form, and we operate with different MLSs. I would use the CAR form and submit it to the MLS if they require us to submit an exclusion form. This would work. So there's choices in here, you know, about how long it be excluded. And down here, so the number 4, seller instruction to broker to exclude property from MLS is A, do not market the property immediately, begin marketing the public on a certain date, or do not market the property to the public during the entire listing period. When either A or B is selected, the seller understands and agrees that they should be that should any public marketing of the property occur, the property listed will be submitted to the MLS for cooperation with other brokers within 1 business day. That is just per our agreements with the MLS. If we start marketing the property, we're obligated to share our listings in the MLS. We can't be running advertisements in the paper.
Do you use?
And then not having it in the MLS.
Garrett?
Yes.
I've been confused each time I've done this with the whole
Yeah.
thing about whether our MLS is part of NAR's adopting of the cooperating.
Bayris is not.
That's okay.
Bayris is not an association owned MLS, and it does not conform to the clear cooperation rule.
Okay.
The other MLSs that we're involved in, Lake County and Humboldt County, are they do follow the NAR guidelines.
Okay.
Okay, any question on that form? Yeah, that form should be signed at the time of the listing, because you don't want to take a listing without having that form in place. Otherwise, you will have to list it in the MLS. And Bayris will accept that form. I believe all the MLSs, the association and Bayris, will accept that form in lieu of their own form. And then this came up the other day too, that we want to have a listing agreement in order to market a property. Even if it's going to be excluded from the MLS, we still want to have a signed listing agreement with the exclusion form. Our company policy is that we wouldn't market what we would call open listings. That is where we don't have any kind of an agreement to be paid in the event we sell the property. We just have the promise from the seller that, oh, I'll pay you if you bring me a buyer. Well, that's well and good, but we go out and we find, let's say we find a colleague who brings in a buyer, and, you know, we have no agreement that that seller's gonna pay either us or our colleague. And, you know, we've seen things occur where we've had a buyer come in during the course of our listing, the listing expires, the seller reaches out to that buyer directly and makes a side deal without, you know, without the agents. You know, that's not good business. So we want that listing agreement to protect us. We want if our listing expires, we want to use that notification part of the listing agreement to let them know which clients have seen the property and which are excluded, and on which clients they will owe us a commission should they enter into a sale with the client who previously saw the property during our listing period. Any questions on that? Okay. Let's see. There's a question about broker files. How long do we keep broker files? Broker risk management recommends 5 to 7 years. We don't go and purge files necessarily, you know, every year. But we're going to fall within that 5 to 7 year range. Maybe every couple of years we'll go back and purge contracts that are over 7 years or over 5 years. So if you're looking for forms from a prior transaction, which we're obligated to give if we're listing a property, we need to go back and see if our brokerage has previously listed that property or previously sold that property. And if there are documents relating to that property in our files, we'll have those files for 5 to 7 years. If they exceed that, we won't have those files. And as we've talked about, you shouldn't have those files either. So there were some questions in the, again, one of the brokers, the weekly practice tips were questions from last month's legal update. I remember one of them said, you know, I have documents from 18 years ago related to the property. Do I need to share those? Well, if you have them, you know, the concept is you got them, you give them. So you have old forms that old, even though they're probably totally irrelevant, you still need to provide them to a potential buyer. So that's why we purge our files, so we don't have to worry about going back and looking for 18-year-old files. We're legally covered by keeping them for 5 to 7 years per the DRE, and that's the period we use for our file maintenance. Any questions on that? Okay. Another weekly practice tip, and I'm not sure we had the chance to discuss this, but it's an important area, and that's the risk of allowing the buyer to perform repairs prior to close of escrow. So if you haven't read this one, please do. I'm a listing agent. The buyers and sellers agreed that the buyers would perform roof repairs prior to close of escrows. The buyer undertook the roof repairs and they canceled the escrow. The buyers are refusing to pay for the roof repairs. What should the parties do? Well, they should probably go to court because you don't want that to happen. The proper response is hopefully the contract contains an addendum requiring the buyer to pay. If so, the buyers have a right to assert a collection action. In the meantime, the seller would need to pay the contractor. That's often what happens, is the seller has to pay and then go chase the buyer for the fees. Here, the buyer in scenario 2, the buyer agreed to do the pest work. It turned out the pest work was more expensive than what the estimates were. The buyer refused to pay, the seller refused to pay, and everything's in limbo now. So it's a risky business for a buyer to make repairs to a property prior to taking ownership. If that is going to work for your particular transaction, and we do have that on occasion, where, you know, you have a seller who, you know, doesn't have the money to do the repair. The buyer wants to have it done before they move in. They want to move in on closing, you know, so there's scenarios where it happens. Just make sure we've got it documented properly. Okay. Steve, you got a question?
Yeah, I was going to say, I learned my lesson early on too. When you're having a pest inspection done, I happen to call Mike Strickland, who's the best pest inspector we have up here, to do an inspection on a listing that that I had. And of course, the escrow fell through, and the pest inspection Strickland came to me and said, Steve, we need you to pay for this because you're the one that ordered the pest inspection.
Yeah, yeah.
So ever since then, I do not order pest inspections or any inspection.
Yeah, and even if we do the favor of ordering an inspection because our client has told us to, we make it clear to the pest company that I'm just making this phone call, but you're going to bill this to so-and-so, the buyer, the client, or the seller. That would be okay, rather than having the seller client call the pest company. I mean, does that make sense, Steve?
It does make sense. However, that is kind of like what transpired in this case, but they still came back on me and said, no, you're the contact person, so we need you to pay this.
Yeah. Okay. All right. Well, good lesson. And you know, I've always loved the remark of one of our agents that I worked with for many years, Eric Rothfeld. And Eric says, I don't pay for refrigerators. So, you know, we get into transactions where, you know, we think appliances are included. We get to the house on the day after closing with the buyer, and they're all excited to have the house, and the refrigerator's not there. So what has to happen there? We got to go back and look at the contract, see if it was included, if the seller walked off with it. We got to get to the seller to have them bring it back or replace it, or give us the money to replace it, that sort of thing. But we don't want to have to pay for it ourselves, so make sure our documentation is clear. Curtis just pointed out that there's a new link down at the bottom of the Zoom screen. If you go to the bottom, and it says AI comparison. So I don't know exactly what you get when you check that. I'll have to check that out at some point. Maybe it'll correct what I'm saying. I don't know. Okay, my last topic for the day is going back to our beloved acronym DAD. Disclose, attribute, and disclaim. DAD. So we have a situation. The neighbor comes over to start at the open house, starts telling all kind of bad stories about the neighborhood and you know, the neighbor's dog and things that have gone on at the house that the sellers never told us about. And what do we do with that information? Well, most often it'll end up in the other in our AVID. And it will be, you know, we'll disclose it. The neighbor, you know, this information was told me, you know, so that's the disclosure part. By the neighbor, that's the attribute part. You attribute to where you got that information. And I haven't done, and I haven't done any further investigation. Buyer should investigate. That would be the disclaimer. So we say we aren't doing any further investigation. Buyer should investigate. An active phrase like that. We want to make sure that we add that buyer should investigate clause. Okay. So Dad, don't forget Dad if you get that kind of information. And that's all I've got today. Has anyone got any transaction questions or any other questions that we cover in this forum? Guess not. So we will be able to get out of here a little early. And we will be sure to sign up for the January 22nd webinar on new laws and new forms. And Happy New Year and have a safe weekend. Thanks for checking in.
Garrett, can you give us
Yeah,
can
yeah.
you give us an update on Randy?
Oh, yeah. Thanks for asking. I've given a few over the week, so.
Yeah, I'm
I don't-
sure.
I don't know who I've talked to and who I haven't. As far as I know, they're still doing tests to figure out when to schedule the surgery. It's a triple bypass surgery for sure. What they're looking into is whether a valve, a heart valve also needs work or replacement. They don't like to do all four of those things at one time, is my understanding. So they're trying to see that if they do the artery work, the triple bypass, that the valve will kind of kick into proper gear and operate as it should. So I think they're still doing evaluation. I asked him to let us know when they scheduled the surgery, and I haven't heard. So I think they're still just kind of figuring out when to do it and what to do that will work best.
Great, thank you.
He remains very upbeat. Of course, a little frustrated being in the hospital. We all would be. But he's, we're all confident this will, be taken care of and he'll come out new Randy.
Great. All right, thank you.
Okay, yeah, thanks. I'll be in touch as soon as I have other information.
All right, thank you so much. Okay.
Anything else?
Oh, thanks for the updates
Okay,
on everything.
talk to you later.
Bye-bye.
Bye.